Alexei, there's one more aspect of the negotiations I wanted to discuss with you. I think it was Deutsche Welle that made a publication about Kozak, the second in administration of Putin on the second day of aggression against Ukraine, when they initiated the full-scale invasion, brought the agreement that he liked 100% himself, and that was much better for Russia than what was discussed later in Istanbul. There was a full, reportedly, agreement of President Zelensky to refuse joining NATO and other demands that Putin initially posted on the day of invasion, but reportedly Putin refused that agreement. Do you know if that agreement existed? Was it reviewed? Well, I did communicate with Kozak for quite a while during my work in the office, and he was one of the more rational people in Russia, and he was against this war. And when the idea of this war prevailed, he was pushed aside. He brought the plan, and he was pushed again with his plan. And then 2 weeks later, there was a different plan on the desk of Putin, which was much less favorable for him. But they, and his organization, his representatives, they did sign it over in Istanbul. It was awaiting just Putin's signature. And once again, I'm afraid we'll never get these terms once again. This one has gone by the wayside. And Kozak has an interesting position. He definitely has a complementary position towards Ukraine. He has relatives in Ukraine. He was vehemently opposing the initiation of this war, and he suffered for that. And I'm not sure which status does he have now, given that he is the vice head of the administration, so he probably is not fully executed, but I'm not aware what is he working on now. So there was one more signal on this week by Bloomberg's report that in Riyadh, the partners and Ukraine have met with Ukraine on the peace deal. China did not arrive. Russia was pissed that these matters were discussed without her. And what do you know about it? How would we gauge it? Well, I want to tell you one thing, that so that we all understood that all this bloody war and the bloody third war is happening with lunch breaks. Communications never ceased. There were change of formats, change of people, but they continuously go on. Some of them spill to the pages of newspapers, others do not. But the logic is, if we're not talking about collective security, for that the players on these boards do not have neither level of authority nor understanding of what's happening, and even Russia and China are not fully grasping the scale of what's happening, that the scale of contradictions is much higher than their capability to regulate that during these negotiations. But these conversations about how can this war end, what are the possible terms, they are ongoing all the time. And the ex-head of CIA did spill some information that Biden's administration did communicate with Putin's before the war and sort of allowed them a small incursion into Ukraine, just don't go beyond the borders. So generally, politicians, and that was one of the main discoveries for me during 2.5 years in my office, that politicians in 99% of cases, they actually declare truth when they make open statements, open declarations. People think that they're always lying. They're not always lying. It's very straightforward. They actually declare what they want to go for during these communications. In personal conversations, they may have different opinions and discuss other angles, but when they're stating it publicly, that is generally to be believed. When Biden says that he wants to keep the conflict, Israel and Gaza conflict, at bay, to not spill and flare the whole region, and the same thing with Ukraine war as well, so it doesn't go beyond the borders. And this is the problem of the West. They are not ready to understand that the problem is bigger than holding it like this. And Ukrainian problem, again, my ratings are going down because I'm talking about that. But if we'll be dumb, we'll fall into the Paraguay version of war, and I don't want us to go there. I think our main problem is that we always bet on the losing side. Throughout the whole history of Ukraine, it's almost like a fantastic curse. We're always betting on the losing side externally. And internally, let me quote you from Black Betrayal. Moscow leader being present at the Black Betrayal, he was surprised, right? Why did you top off such a wonderful man and put such an asshole above you? And this is the eternal problem of Ukrainian politics, to always bet on the external loser, starting with Karl XII, and now on America, that is not ready to help us fight this war. And when we talk about Britain's participating and actively participating in the visits recently and Sunak's statements, Brits are playing their own game. Do you have any parallels between Johnson's statements and Sunak's statements recently and the agreement so that we would be bravely continuing the war? Right? Who's paying for that dinner? Well, Britain at least contributes their own input, 3 billion euros. Right, they put some money, 3 billions, and we bring 500,000 of our people, right, for mobilization. So how do you see that differently, Alexei? Well, at the point now we really don't have much option. We basically have to continue. If we were theoretically discussing, we probably should be trying to bring negotiations to the same situation that we had on the table in March, and perhaps exchange neutrality for withdrawal of Putin's troops to the borders of 23rd of February, and to hell with and forget Donbass and Crimea for now, but at least get back to the borders of February. And that would have been a strong governmental move and a strong position. Unfortunately, for now, we are fighting to the last Ukrainian, and as it is. And you mean to not agree to British offers? Well, Nikolay, everybody was supposed to sign the guarantees of securities of that contract that was on the table in April, March. So, yeah, that included everybody from China, United States, Middle East, and a bunch of other guarantors. And by the way, Russia was also a guarantor on that list. And there are a lot of elegant solutions. I'm just naming the simplest. All countries create and pitch to the warehouses with military equipment that are sealed and forbidden for Ukrainian government to access until and if Russia starts a new act of aggression. Then, in this case, Ukraine has an opportunity to uncork these warehouses and use whatever is there for defense of Ukraine. And Russia should be a contributing member to these warehouses. That would have been one of the best technical solutions for security guarantee. And now Russia, respecting the neutral status of Ukraine, and basically that's a United Nations Chapter 25, where every country should have an opportunity to defend itself. We come out and promise Russia that we will never attack its territory, and Russia gives us equipment enough for 2 army corps that are in the warehouse, and we are keeping it there until there is any aggression against our territory by any government, any country. And we might get access to train our maintenance brigades under supervision of international commission that would confirm that we're not indeed withdrawing shells and equipment from the warehouses. Periodically, things and parts can be maintained and changed, replaced. Do you think they would not go for that? They would. They would actually run for that. We just need to communicate with them and keep making these offers and make it in a serious manner. So there are politicians and there are government leaders, right? Different roles. And I apologize, but I'm fulfilling my oath to Ukrainian people that I gave when I was becoming an officer. And somebody, I'm not pointing fingers from the current administration. I understand they have war traumas, certain positions that they cannot jump off that bandwagon, and even precursing political leaders and all that political team that was screaming, get rid of Moscow, Muscovites for knives, and that were jumping and screaming all that, they're paying with their blood on the front now. I disagree with them. I'm in a different political position, but one needs to acknowledge that right nationalists indeed are paying with their blood for their position. They've lost a lot of people there because they have their own belief and they're eager to pay with their lives for this. They need to be respected. Even Russians respect them. Their foes on the front respect them for their bravery. They can call them banderas and whatever else, but they still have respect. I have to respect for these fighters. But there is a bunch of people who are screaming to the borders of 91 without even lifting their butt off the sofa. And it would be awesome for these people if other people fought the war and they just elevated themselves somehow during the process on the social economic ladder, starting from the turnover of big means and the volunteer funds where they can retain 20% for maintenance, going to political parties where they earn their own political capital on the hatred rhetoric. And if we go outside that framework and remember that God is only where love is, and where there is hatred, there is no God. And ultimately, we cannot win, neither side can win this war on hatred. So besides these deposits that I talked about, the warehouses with the military equipment, they could have also be persuaded to give additional economic bonuses and provide other benefits for the country. And they're rather open even now to discuss that. So they would be one of the guarantors of that process. And there are a number of others elegant solutions that allow us to reinforce the security system and reinforce the guarantees much better than those Belaversky and Minsk memorandums and all that. It just takes somebody to start playing seriously at the geopolitical table. All right. Thank you, Alexei. Despite that, Britain became a trendsetter because now there is a lot of communications, bilateral communications with different countries, but Britain came first and they set the frame of these and the format of these negotiations. And now other leaders of other European countries that we're negotiating with, they either now have to offer something more or something similar to what Great Britain offered. Yeah, let's deep dive, Nikolay, into what Britain offered us. How is that agreement different from Budapest Memorandum? Even the formulations are the same. What responsibilities did Britain take upon itself that they have not done or had before? To start consulting within 24 hours? Oh, they've started them even before the war. To supply military equipment? Yeah, they are. They included this new one, annual monetary help. Okay, that's a new one. But besides that, there is nothing new. And if the guarantees will be on the same diplomatic level, that there is nothing binding them, there is no binding formulations in this document. And there is nothing from what they already have been doing, nothing different. And then following them, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, other countries will likely join. And summarily, they might give some new guarantees. Something new may emerge out of that. But it will not be a new breakthrough, a new historic breakthrough in the guarantees and the process here. They're just a pillar of support of sorts. But as President Zelensky, and I'm quoting him now, you guys are paying with dollars and we're paying with our lives. So I, Alexei Arestovych, the citizen of Ukraine, do not want to exchange the lives of my people for dollars. I don't like that. President Zelensky said that if these guarantees were achieved in 1991, specifically with Britain, the war would not have started, convinced Vladimir Zelensky. Well, Nikolai, let's remember some history. In 1991, Britain and United States were telling our leaders, trying to compel them to not leave the Soviet Union. George Bush was here at the Congress, convincing our parliamentaries to not leave the USSR, to not go mad. And our opposition, our people here, our Ukrainian communists actually were screaming, no, we're separate now. So yeah, as a fact, the West wasn't quite sure what to do with us, and they're still not sure what to do with us. So you know how the West is playing. Of course, they're putting things like expanding EU, expanding NATO, and normally when you bring people into your fold, you would start going in to help them, right, if there is a conflict. But they don't always do that. Do you remember about South Vietnam, that they abandoned? Panama? South African Republic. South African is a difficult story, but still they lost the war in Angola to Soviet Union and its allies, and then Pretoria regime was liquidated as a summary output and result of that conflict. And the number of wars where collective West is abandoning the figures of their missionaries, those figures who were very pro-Western, and then they were not accepted, like, by the way, Gaddafi, they were about at least 10 countries that you can count. So did we think about that in 91, in 2001, in 2021, about the destiny of those people and countries who were very pro-Western, who were friendly with the West, had a lot of investment in the West, Western education? They were changing their country's military to the Western standards, and then all of a sudden became enemies of the West and ended up. So that's what we should have been reflecting upon in the 91. Instead, we signed the Budapest Memorandum. We had a conflict with Russia, with the Black Sea Fleet, which we led to ending, or at least some neutrality. And as a result of this conflict, of this document, we gave bombers to Russia, we gave missiles to Russia. Then in 99, we signed additional contract about friendship with Russia, and there was some time of warming up of relations, regardless of the oil wars. And then we decided to take a different position. And we cannot say that Russia was leading a very smart politics. They did everything that we would be afraid of them and would want to go to the West. But, dear friends, if we are going to the West, we need to make sure that we can provide materially, economically, and militarily for that direction. Our economy is in the shitter. And please name at least one reform that brought upon the wealth of Ukrainian people during those 30 years. Just one that actually increased the wealth of our people. Different presidents, different congresses. Can you give me one example? Okay, I want to bring up the simplification of taxes, right? Oh, right, that and maybe payments to mothers for getting the kids born. Okay, so we got two. The criteria of effectiveness of our political regime should be very simple. Are we growing or are we decreasing? I think it only increased in Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan. In Belarus, it's kind of staying. In Russia, it's somewhat staying, but slowly decreasing. In Ukraine, we shrank almost twice our population. And with such politics, it's difficult to maintain the course to NATO, having Russia on the other side very vehemently opposing that. And in that situation with our economy, with our population, with our military reserves was something akin to madness. And now we continue to insist on this viewpoint. All right, we'll mobilize 500,000. Another 6 months passes, and we'll need another 500,000. Do you know our military potential? And it's official data, it's not something secret. In theory, we should have 5.5 million. In reality, it's probably 1.5. Okay, so what do we do after 2 more mobilizations? Right, you can say that Russia may collapse. Okay, but what if it doesn't? Let's pose that question. For example, Russia did not collapse in a year and a half or 2 years, and after our 3 mobilizations of 500,000. So we are fully mobilized, we have nobody else to fight, and then we can ask Dmitry Kuleba, what next? And he would tell you, we don't have plan B. It's not our planning style. It's Arestovych's who are planning that. We do not do that. We're like blind moose running through the forest on fire, and the destiny is leading us. And if anything, we can take the shovels and fight with that. So yeah, as a result of this politics, what will be remaining of Ukrainian people? I'm sorry, but I have to pose this question after 2 years of this war. Is this the price we're paying for still going to EU and NATO and refusal to adopt neutrality, which is still on the table? And at the meantime, we still have no hopes for joining EU and NATO. The only condition under which we may be joined to NATO and EU is if NATO and EU win and prevail in this war, and NATO and America and the whole other set of wars around the world. But that makes me laugh. So you did mention Kennan's publication. I found one from New York Times in '97 when he was 90-something years old. when he was commenting on the NATO's expansion, he actually made a statement that they are making it as inner political story in the United States. They're using it as the internal victory, internal achievement, but he was saying back then that they still have nothing to support that encroachment, that expansion. Right, and that was the statement by the guy who invented the way to destroy Soviet Union. He became an architect, and his method won. So he understood some real mechanisms. Why was he ignored? Because everybody was euphoric. Because in 91, they declared a victory over the Soviet communist bloc. It was the end of history, and they started to dismantle their military industrial complex. We're not unique here, right? We destroyed ours, they destroyed theirs. We're getting rid of our nukes and giving what? Giving nukes to the side that we've been conflicting about Crimea before, right? What a wonderful idea. After running a conflict with your neighbor, then let's give him your nukes and some other weapons. That's a very original solution, right? And then there is a very simple story. If the West was playing to the end, and if they really indeed played the whole collapse of Soviet Union to the end, they would have put all the representatives from the Eastern Europe. They put them at the table and discussed the opportunities and how to rearrange the world. But they were not. But now China, Russia, Iran, and the others are getting the idea about that weakness of the West. When they will fully get this idea, it'll be real bad for everybody. But for now, they're starting to understand how it works. They've spent 25 years trying to be liked by the West, by the collective West. But the collective West does not see them as equals, or does not see them as equal players at the table. But I have bad news. They also do not consider us in Ukraine as humans, because the proposition to fight to the last Ukrainian, and that's the only way I can read that British proposition, this is, let's achieve our goals on the Paraguay version, right? After that, I want to scary thing, but agree with Putin and say and use the word idiots, right? I think Putin actually repeated my word here when he called everybody idiots. All right, Alexei, but that narrative about fighting to the last Ukrainian, Russia was implementing that for months, if not years, methodically. Well, Nikolay, you don't even need to go into politics. You can just count the potentials, right? 1.5 million. What happens after? For me, it's a really bad story when you want to pull 500,000 people from the economy. And when people are saying that war fighters, when they come back, they'll become avid economic agents, I don't know whether to cry or laugh here. That people who will come from army will immediately join our economy and will be providing and working, etc. It'll take at least half a year, to some people 2 years, to rehabilitate themselves. And we need to have resources to rehabilitate them. Right? It's not so easy, because you have to maintain these 500,000 that are returning on rehabilitation, on some dotation, money, support, and all that. And then another 500,000 needs to be trained and used effectively. And then there'll be another 500,000 mobilization. And that's a very sad story. That's a difficult one. I wouldn't say that Paraguay had a chance to fight longer than we actually have the runway left. So people, we are paying with our lives, with our historic destiny of our people, for the fairy tale about that purple ray that we've been believing for the 32 years. Are we mad? Just want to ask you. Those people who believe it. I will repeat once again. I understand those people who are dying there on the front. They may be mistaken, but they deserve respect because they're fighting for their ideals. But those people who are sitting in Europe and other countries and still screaming to the borders of 91, fight to the last Ukrainian, do you guys understand that when you're screaming the war to the end, it means it's the war till your personal end? All right, let's go talk about mobilization. Actually, not even about that. Different angle. There was a statement by Zelensky during his speech that people who are in Europe that those people who left the country at the beginning of war as refugees, that's one side of the medal. There were different people leaving of different ages because the borders were open for everybody. Not exactly so, but okay. So we didn't know what will happen tomorrow. We managed to liberate 50% of occupied territories, and we've been fighting for 2 years. During that time, we had people who crossed the border in violation of our current laws, and this is a question to people who can and should be mobilized. And they need to be either supporting Ukraine paying taxes, but also they need to be able to be joining the conscription, because if you're in Ukraine paying taxes, you're also defending the country. But if you're working abroad overseas, you're not contributing to our defense. So you either need to go join the draft when we ask you, or to somehow find a way to pay taxes here in Ukraine. Because if we don't have money and we don't have troops, we cannot defend our country. So what message do you read here? Whom is he turning to? I think they measured some sociology, and they're figuring that the reaction is negative. So they're trying to correct his New Year message when he divided our citizens into refugees and the normals. So they tried to backpedal that a little and acknowledge that the people of our country living abroad are also people of our country. But the honest conversation should sound like this. Guys, you're dying for the ghostly ideas of EU and NATO that we'll probably never get. But the guarantee that we can have is neutrality. And this is the real guarantee we can get enough support for. So until they bring that on the table, I don't think they're playing within the reality framework. They're playing well within their own political goals and in the framework of their doctrine, and they're playing effectively in the foreign politics track. But outside of that framework, it's a crime against Ukrainian people. I cannot qualify that otherwise. Not criminal way, but historical way. So there was also another interesting news from Ivano-Frankovsk, regional military administration. People are being called upon to the front to build fortification lines in Donetsk segment of the front. They're looking for 300 people, and they're speaking about that publicly, turning to constructors, construction people, construction workers and companies in the region. So I have a question. Why do they speak about that in the open, trying to find 300 builders? I would think you can find 300 people to build your fortification lines. Why? Nikolay, they need to show that they're working. Each head of administration needs to report they're all competing in the level of how good they are. So frankly, 300 builders do not solve anything on the front at large. Even in the framework that is currently being implemented, the word to the last Ukrainian, however painful it sounds, but it's time for a cold shower. I will not shy away from the formulations that seem to be very extreme. And trust me, if you knew a real situation, you would understand that I'm actually trying to present them in a soft light. If you knew real situation, you would understand that I'm not expressing very strong formulations. I'm actually using rather soft ones. So if we stay in the framework of war to the last Ukrainian, even here we're very ineffective, because here we can bring some concrete questions as well. Dividing your men and women into categories, right? When you do that, you need to make sure that you have them, the best of the best, whom you can supply to the storm brigades, right? These are best of the best. We don't have many of them, but you need to promise the bonuses and certain benefits for those who decides to go there. It's super risky, but we need these people. And your people, your kids and your families will get access to new social ladders and new opportunities. Thank you for doing it. Second, there are military. The 70 from 100 who are never present at the front line, who do logistics, supplies, coordination, information, etc. You still need to provide enough benefits for them so that they would agree to do that, so that they're not volunteering, they're not leaving their families and their livelihoods, but they actually would volunteer to go because it makes sense economically as well. And then there are others whom perhaps can get a promise that, okay, we will not conscribe you to the military, but if you come and help us build certain fortifications, you have a document that allows you to not be drafted, right? That allows us to build additional fortifications to reinforce our military on the front, so they will suffer 50% less losses and can make sure that the enemy incurs 50% more losses storming these fortifications. So that would be an effective approach. And frankly, the only situation then we need labor armies, right? When you promise people that they don't take guns and we don't call them to the front line, but we help them to build, we train them, but make sure that they build us the biggest fortification lines we can afford. And not military should be doing that, right? So that what could be done if we're playing the war scenario. I also had a different idea that when I was in the office, that we need to make sure that each region has air defense systems of its own. And you can offer people that they're not going to be drafted into military, but here is the projector, here's the strong light, here's the communication line, so you get a heads up when UAVs are flying over. Here's a special machine gun set on the truck. So you also can say at the end of the war that you were participating in the war, you were defending the skies of your city or your village. You're a good guy, you're a hero, and perhaps you're older, perhaps you're 60 plus, maybe you have more kids, so you cannot go to the front, but still you served in air defense, right? And there are a lot of niches like that, where people with lesser level of preparedness, with good motivation, right, but not enough to go to the front. So many people can go there. They would have brought enough effort to fight back, to destroy a lot of Russian attacking means. Part of them might understand, in serving in these territorial organizations, they would understand that, the war is not too scary, and they might even consider going to the front. Others would still be working and be economic agents while defending their territory territorially. So there would be a lot of multiplication, positive economic outputs in this case. But this is not being done. So look, I'm against the course that we have chosen. I think it's a crime against Ukrainian people, historically. But even if we remain within the course, war to the end, to the victory, that even there we're extremely non-effective. We have some random good successes, but as a system, we're not there. And that's my message. All right, I think it's time to remember that today we also support another fundraiser for Special Operations Services. As far as I understand, they're on Avdiivka direction. Yeah, they're near Avdiivka. They need more Mavic drones. They're special operations who need eyes in the sky. And they're rather expendable commodity, so they personally reached out to us asking for urgent help. And despite us having dozens of other fundraisers, this is a critically important one. They're in a very serious part of the front and they have no drones left. So please, regardless of the politics, we're talking about the war is war. Our soldiers need to be dressed, fed, and equipped. And they need to understand that the country is helping them. I keep repeating it, but I will not be tired to repeat it again. If you can send at least 1 hryvnia, even that, just do it. Every ping, every ding in the bank account is a sign for them that people remember about them, people appreciate their sacrifice, and people support them. And I can talk about different ways out, different ways what could have been done before, but the war is already going, and we do need to support our troops. So this is not too big of a fundraiser. We've gathered bigger ones, but this is very urgent, so if you can donate to this one, please do. This is a very difficult part of the front. All right, and we also remind you all that we do not touch this money. We have no relation to it. We don't even touch anything that, as a principle, goes directly to the detachment bank account. As for the inner politics of Ukraine, an important mention here, one of the deputies, congressman of People's Servant, Oleg Duda, who participated in one of the forums as an opponent to you, and then wrote a complaint about you and sent it to police, trying to start the criminal investigation. And recently, being on a live talk show at the NTA channel, Great Lvov, he said that there should not be any freedom of speech during war. All media need to work for the victory and for the government, and each media is a weapon. said this congressman. So then I think we probably are not much different in this context from Russian Federation, because we then do not have any clear pathway to our media, how it is supposed to be working. There is no governmental input into the situation with media and how it should be working. So these are just opinions of the congressman. But we do have our partners and allies in the West. How do they react to this? How can they react to us dwindling or attacking freedom of speech? That recently there was a prosecution of the journalist Yuriy Nikolov. There was another fact when Bigusinfo, the investigators and their communications were brought to public attention and were published and released without their permission. So there's almost some consorted wave of attack. And yeah, I want to say we do have, Nikolay, attacks on journalism as one of the problems that we have besides corruption. And we cannot be saying that we have a liberal course and liberal politics because our leading party is jumping different directions from libertarian to something medium controlled. And here we have 2 years of experience of a certain course with a TV marathon, United Joint Marathon, that is on all the TV channels in Ukraine. Mr. Shufrich, the head on the freedom of speech, small, funny-looking guy who doesn't like Arestovych very much. Yurchishin, his last name. Okay. So he said, according to his estimation, this is not an effective politics, and we probably should listen to him, and perhaps journalists should get a lot of interviews from him to try to explain what does he mean when he is saying that government policies are not effective. And again, where is our journalist community? Are the guys afraid that they'll be drafted? Well, then the girls can do that. There were a lot of publications supporting him. Okay, good already that, but where is system support? There is no systemic support. And the girls, I guess, are also concerned about their employment because most of our main media channels are owned by the oligarchs. And in Ukraine, for the most part, most of the TV channels here are indeed belonging to the oligarchs, and they reflect either the point of view of the government or the political subject that is criticizing the government. And we had the freedom of critique, that we did have, but we never had a true freedom of speech. Now, what do we want? Dunda is suggesting the extreme position that media is a weapon. And then we can post a question, how are we different from Russia? Because even in Russia, not all media are weapons. And even in the current times, there is some discussion, some public discussion about their military. They're at least relatively openly criticizing military. And they're putting to jail the ones who usually come out from the public, from society, attacking the army. They usually get jail times. But those who are part of systemic opposition, somewhat government-related opposition, they actually do that rather successfully. Here we had Bezuglia, who tried to criticize some of the processes in the military, and she was dragged through mud. So it's only her congresswoman position that saved her for now. But this is not how you win wars. You need to have freedom of speech. You need to have proper analysis, free discussion about strengths and weaknesses. And when you cut your freedom of speech, perhaps you can get some short-term effects that might help you right now. In the long term, these short-term effects will actually be the reason for your downfall by removing us from reality. We already have issues with reality. It takes us an effort to see the reality. We usually see it through some scandal. This is the only means that I see for over 10 years of being in the media sphere in Ukraine is a big media scandal. Other means do not quite work. That means that discussion of specialists that should flow in a calm and reasonable manner almost doesn't exist. And that results in us not having a proper strategy, because strategy also depends upon the freedom of ideas. And then you have projects in style that all media are weapons, and the government still cannot develop a single unified politics in regards to media. And it's done differently. We should change the rules. We should actually allow all the media channels to work. Just let them, everybody, let them all work, whoever wants to be in the media sphere, and perhaps set certain rules in regards to information security. You can take experience of Azerbaijan, by the way, who managed to succeed it, and implement it here. But I think that we probably would not like it, because if we take American rules of military censorship, people who are building up their image in the military, in the troops, in the trenches, will disappear. Because what we do now, all the videos that we post from the trenches, from the front line, in America, you would not be able to do that. Whoever posted that would have been thrown to the social garbage. This is much more harsher law in America for that. Here we do publish details about working out, the details of the fight. We have the full duration of the fight available for review. And with all my respect to people who film their experience, there should be some things off limits. And I'm not suggesting to ban everything. I'm suggesting to implement something for half a year and see how it works. Since we're looking for versions for all things to do and we don't have an optimal one, we have to go and try something. So launch all media for half a year, let them all work, and just implement a few rules. So what rules would you do? Same principle as we use here, Nikolay, do no harm. Same thing that you use during the artillery shelling. You do not reveal the dislocation, the positions of your military. You do not reveal where the hit came to. You do not reveal what was damaged. So it took a while to train our society, right? So that's some sort of a societal norm now. And it has to become the norm among the journalists as well. What, for example, is Kremlin narrative or enemy's narrative, right? How can that be interpreted? If Kremlin said today at 6 p.m., it's 6 p.m. and we also, for example, have at the same time, right? We have 6 p.m. in the same time zone. Does repeating that statement mean that you repeat Moscow narrative? And then you need to regulate these things, maybe establish a joint commission. It should be their work, right, of the cabinet of ministers and media. I don't think there was any meeting that they would dedicate to media policy. No, I don't remember that too, exactly. So I think we are destroying ourselves. We are cutting our own throat with our actions, and then we blame everything on Putin. But I would say we are doing a lot of mistakes to make it more comfortable for him, right? Where is the commission for TV and media? Where is journalist ethics? Where perhaps journalist unions? So brave Yurchishin gave an interview. What next, right? Kudos to him for doing it. But he put the question in a hard way. What happens after? And then I guess we'll see from the media what unfolds. Let me wrap it rhetorically. There's a lot of things I want to say, but in order to participate in this, we probably should need a strong, good signal from the government that they are good for it, because right now the only signal that comes is really investigative, criminal and other investigations that followed for Nikolay. So perhaps one of the rules that government would bring, if we talk about the rules, is do not publish anything about corruption in the Ministry of Defense. Do you think that that may be a danger to that set of rules? Well, yeah, this is definitely that they will need to not do, because if we are talking about things, we need to be able to talk about it, right? Perhaps during the forum, if we are talking to our partners and foreign allies, we should not be bringing it out in the public, but we should not be not discussing it. Internally, there should be a very lively discussion about the corruption and things that we can make work better. Alexei, I can't even imagine how you can hold them information like that for a month or two. You know, I'll give you a good example, Nikolay. Publication of our losses. In Israel, they're not hiding. Israel didn't even, during the war of 1978, they were not hiding. In Azerbaijan, however, they are hiding that. Now, in Ukraine, how do we do it? Do we hide it? Do we reveal it? That's a good question for discussion. Well, if we are hiding our losses, it means that we are devaluing the cost of lives, right? You can say a lot of things, technical, moral things. How do you hide it? To what degree? How often do you refresh these numbers? Perhaps you can put two milestones, 15th of January, 15th of August, and give the losses twice a year, right? On one hand, you're not lying to society, you're revealing the data. On the other hand, you're not doing it comfortably for the enemy so they cannot track the losses to their effectiveness. But that needs to be part of discussion between the government and society. We have, unfortunately, all these connections broken between the government and society, and they only are working wherever they exist on the personal level. And nobody seriously is working on that front. And the media just talks about the war till the end and to victory. All right, so if you are fighting a war to the end, then make sure you fight it in a proper way, right? Don't fight it as a suicide mission, fight it perhaps as a collective suicide, so at least you take your enemies with you, right? Or most of your enemies with you. Otherwise, you're suiciding yourself not too effectively. Another thing, registry of people who are to be conscribed and who can be mobilized, and our transfer of those lists to NATO. I'm a humanitarian, right, for the most of my training, but I do understand that if internet goes down, electricity goes down, we may have issues knocking on the NATO doors, right? And this is our registry. How can we give it to NATO? Because that would be an example of just factual transfer of our independence into the hands of other countries, our very crucial data. And don't forget that there are some servicemen of very special professions, and there are quite a few of them, that those registries should not be ever sent to anyone. So all that should be stored with NATO, right? And by the way, Hungary is a member of NATO. And yeah, right, there are no friendly intel services, even within the same organization. So we behave ourselves as the nation of condottiers, cheap ones, because we have some people who, for the right of doing that, they're eager to discount everybody else. Nobody cares about economy. Nobody really works with the government setup. And we're not even talking about historic destiny of the country. But we can quickly give all the lists of our people to be mobilized to NATO. Turkey is in NATO. Hungary is in NATO. There are enough spies in NATO. What that is about. So we are revealing the main thing that we have, personal data of people. And that's how it always goes here. What do we want from the country where 70% of laws are, according to current stats, are going against the constitution? They need serious auditing. I would even, if to go this pathway, I would give also the anthem, the flag, and the Ukrainian insignia to NATO as well, just to be truly independent, so that NATO can give us on loan next time when the next president is elected. Let's also give them the money printing press, right? And save money there as well, because we can't really manage ourselves, right? That's what we are trying to push internally. Let NATO and the EU do it for us. I've only seen that desire stronger to be liked by the West with Putin, but even he is getting more sober right now, and we still not. We still want to be liked. You did promise, Alexei, to talk about Poland at some point, and we do have a bunch of news from Poland. One of them is that Tusk is announcing a meeting with Duda and their visit to Kiev, and there are a lot of things happening internally in Poland that very much look like their system is going into the conflict, and the further, the deeper it becomes. They start to arrest congressmen related to Duda in the presidential palace. That's another sign. Yeah, they have a serious crisis because right centrists are fighting with left liberals. That's, roughly speaking, similar to what's happening in the United States. Lefty Democrats with isolationists. For us, lefties are a little more comfortable because they're for Ukraine, but as we see, even they have issues with blocking the borders. And we see that the new agreement with Poland may be broken at any moment, so it's pretty fragile. Plus, there are more issues with agricultural matters, and Poland is going through its own crisis, trying to answer the question, where do they have to build up their country to? Where are they going to? Because they have different classes. They have different people who make their money from agriculture, and then they have people who dwell in the cities, and they have different priorities. And they're also preparing for possible war with Russia. That's why the head of their security had announced twice that to the next possible clash with Russia is only 3 years left. In Germany, they're saying 5. So they're also adopting another law about mobilization with more restrictions that if you do not come, you can get jail time up to 5 years, and you have also to present yourself within 6 hours, so very rapid way. And I think they're taking our experience. They saw that Ukraine did not do that preemptively before the war, and it's much more difficult to adopt this law during the war. So they want to ensure themselves. Because Poland, unlike us with all their deficiencies, is trying to conduct policies that they can implement and support with their economic and military resources. And attempt to adopt this law is basically an attempt to make sure they are capable of remaining within EU, NATO, and they're capable of having their independent voice and provide for themselves. Because in Ukraine, it's like in the joke, in the anecdote, Ivan, do you want to marry a British queen? Yeah, I do. Okay, half a thing is done. Now we only have to convince the queen. And Poles are trying to learn from us. So another interesting law they adopt is quickened procedure for giving citizenship to Ukrainian refugees. A simplified procedure for Ukrainian businesses to restart in Poland. So they understand that culturally we are very close, and it's much easier for them to assimilate our citizens. And many of them show signs that they don't really look forward to letting those citizens go back to Ukraine. So Ukraine is being torn apart on both sides. One side, we're losing people at the front. On the other side, we lose a lot to the refugee phenomenon. And our population is dwindling. And the result of us growing or being in a good trend is growth of our population. Soviet Union used to calculate that figure in units, tanks, jets, machine guns. The West calculates that in money, but I think we should be counting that in people. And Europe actually is getting benefits by getting the best of ours and the most economically active of ours. And that's why I would say we are not effective even in the framework of the Western strategy, even though I do think that strategy has its fault. Poles are much more effective. Couple more minutes, Alexei. Bild published, as they said, exclusive secret document that Putin's escalation against NATO is possible already in 2024. And yeah, Nikolay, this is a scenario of military exercise. This is not a secret document. This is a very ambitious document that NATO has to take somewhere 300,000 troops. They don't really have a way to do that. They have no way to arm them. So this is very optimistic. But okay, let's consider that perhaps it happened. And they're trying to play out the military clash based on this scenario. And however, this document says that it gets very close to the actual war, and it doesn't reach the war. It just ends in preparations and maneuvers around the border. So here I would say on the West, with all my criticism of the West, there are still people in the West who are talking blunt about the possible clash with Russia. And they're not added to Russian spies, unlike me. For over 20 years, I'm trying to understand the logic of my compatriots who attack directly the person who is saying that there will be a war with Russia, who immediately put me in the rank of Russian spies. I would think that it would make more sense to put me in the rank of British or American spies, but by some mysterious feat of fortune, they decided that I'm a Moscow spy. For 20 years, I'm looking for a rational answer for this, and I still cannot find one. So on the West, at least, these people are not being accused of spycraft in favor of Moscow. They can speak openly about these issues. I think the West will not be ready for anything in 24. I want to remind that Poland is doing their best to beef up their military, but the 18th Division that is designed to cover Suwalki corridor, they're their top priority, and they're fitting that division, but the time frame was pushed out 3 times already. Now it's supposed to be done in 26. So if anything happens in 25, Poland will not be anywhere ready. Now, if it happens in 24, nobody will be ready. We also should remind that Trump might win in the United States, and who already said that I'll leave NATO and you guys will be left to decide what you do with Putin. I will resolve it with Putin on my own. Are you guys ready in Europe for United States possibly leaving NATO? Because, for decades, they were relying on Americans funding and maintaining this organization. And now if Americans decide, well, screw that, we are going to do our own stuff, then, Europe stays fat, tasty, and harmless. And Ukraine is, unlike Europe, we're rather slender and we're very spiky with our military. So their attempt to help Ukraine without understanding situation and not even realizing how far destroyed their military complex is can only cause a sad smile. But I would also say that NATO is indeed working on different scenarios, part of which lead to collapse of the whole system of their defense, or reviewing that possibility. They're reviewing them in seriousness, for which they should be praised, because they do have professional military, not too many, but they do have the people who know how to do that and how to look reality in the eyes. But if that leaks into the open media, we can talk and see and discuss these plans. If it doesn't get leaked into the media, we can only hint to that here and allude that they exist. And they do understand that they're not ready and they don't have enough time. So they're trying to do some measures similar to what we tried to do that, but when we tried to do that before the war, but it was too little and too late. Alexei, we've worked for 2 hours in the live stream. We left a lot of publications not discussed, so we do want to address that in the next stream. I think it's not fair to our listeners who've been with us for 2 hours, but perhaps just let's leave the most newsworthy items for the next stream. Right, just, our viewers need to understand that we're doing it for the whole week, once a week, right? If we were streaming 3 times a week, that would have been a different story. So please endure if you can, and those who can't, well, don't endure. Just make sure that you do pitch into the fundraiser for the troops. Today and yesterday, we, by the way, closed 2 fundraisers, and I think we're moving real well on the list of requests. And, the major donation is only 10 to 20 hryvnias, but we are doing it rather fast. All right, so please support Special Forces on Avdiivka direction, Ukrainian Special Forces. They need a couple of Mavics, Mavic 3T, for which they're fundraising 460 hryvnias. This is direct fundraiser for their account. We do not touch the money. Everything you send goes directly to the detachment. Thank you, Alexei Arestovych. Do not forget to subscribe to his channel, to Alpha Media, and YouTube, Telegram, and of course, subscribe to the Privateer station if you are listening or watching that material in English. Thank you very much for your kind support, and have a good night.